there. Welcome to Everything's Relative. I'm Eve Sturgis. This is a podcast. So this is exactly what happened. A dude sent a message to my husband on social media. My husband called him on the telephone. That dude said he had been waiting for me to figure out that he was my dad for over 30 years. And I said, why would I be looking for that dude? Because I already have a dad. And then my whole understanding of identity, family, secrecy, and biology changed. So I made a podcast about it. And this is it. I talked to people from all around the world who have had experiences like mine, because it turns out there's a lot of us. It turns out there are a lot of ways this can happen. It turns out there's a lot to say about all of it. And sometimes I like to talk about what's happening in the world or my life because I think our DNA discoveries are important within the context of our personal lives and social history. But today I'm almost going to skip it entirely because all that's happened is that this week is that Russia invaded Ukraine. Texas passed some horrifying laws about transgendered children and their families. And the worst environmental report about the earth and where we're headed came out. So, yeah. Maybe next week it will be different. Maybe by the time this episode comes out, everything will be better. I hope so. Today I have the distinct pleasure of talking with author Peter Boni, whose book Uprooted is now available everywhere that you want to buy books. I read it in November and can happily and honestly recommend it to anyone interested in the history of donor conception through the lens of a memoir-style mystery. I talk with him about how I feel about it and what I thought about it and how I describe it. So I won't do it here. I'll just start the tape. You can listen to us describe it together. Thanks for being here. This is Everything's Relative, and I'm Eve Sturgis. So I am sitting here today with Peter Boni, writer, author of Uprooted, Family Trauma, Unknown Origins, and the Secretive History of Artificial Insemination. Thrilled to have had the experience of getting to read the book a few months ago, and then also now receiving it in the mail. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
I don't know who is responsible for that, but it's a really good feeling book, and I think that matters.
I'll give Greenleaf Book Group all of the credit.
All right. Thank you, Greenleaf. You make a beautiful book. So this book is great. It's wonderful for lots of reasons, but and you know what? Before we get into that, can you just tell us a little bit about your childhood or what life was like before your discovery? And doesn't have to be a lot because what I really want is for people to get the book and read about it. But let's give everybody a Cliff's Notes version.
Okay, sure, Eve. So how did I get to be the person I am?
Yeah.
Basically, I think there were three things that were experiential. One was a somewhat of a dysfunctional or disruptive childhood. I was in a working class family. I was in 11 different schools in several states between the first and the eighth grade. Rather unstable life, a sick dad. A state college education, really the first in my family to have received that. And that opened many doors of opportunity for me. And then the military experience as a special operations infantry team leader in Vietnam, which helped shape my leadership style. I always took my DNA for granted. But then, hey, how about that DNA? In 1995, my mother, who was recovering from a post-operative stroke, spilled the beans that I wasn't the biology that I thought I was. My father was sterile, and they had sought the help of a fertility specialist from Harvard Medical School to help my conception, and my conception was through an anonymous sperm donor. So I had to go like this, as the same person, but everything had changed for me at that moment.
Yeah, actually, I have marked the paragraph. Can I read it?
Sure.
This paragraph that you wrote, which I think is it's so lovely because I think I just think everyone who has had this experience or is an NPE of some kind would relate to this. But in that moment, my life turned upside down. Everything I knew about myself, about where I came from, about who I was, changed in an instant. Everything I thought I knew was challenged with 6 simple words. I would go on to discover that my conception was not the product of an affair, but had been achieved through a process to which my dad, the only father I ever knew, had fully consented. Thus began my quest to finding my new identity. And however, this book is not just about your personal emotional journey, although that's in here a little. What you really discovered, or what you, and also, I have so many things I want to say. What you discovered was that you discovered things about the whole world of donor conception, or artificial insemination, or IVF, like all this whole world. And so you really made it a mission to understand the whole culture and industry and world and science around how this happened, instead of just focusing on who was your dad. And so in that way, your book is an amazing contribution to this growing library of books, which sort of expose and inform us about all these different ways that it's the ways that DNA are sort of, the DNA testing is blowing worlds up, but also just about all these like strange histories that are really foundational to our country, but nobody knows about it.
Well, remember in 1995, when I first learned this, the internet was in its infancy. Google was 3 years away from even being founded. And 21st century DNA technology had 12 years to go before 23andMe came out with their first product. My mother misremembered the name of the doctor, didn't get the address exactly right, and I had basically no clues to find the source of my seed. And I was just bound and determined that I wanted to know my genealogy, my genealogical medical history. And, did I have any siblings? I was raised as an only child. And there were no records kept by any of the doctors at that period of time. So I was just banging into stone walls in my research. So my only thing to do, which I found somewhat therapeutic, is just research the daylights out of the very industry or the science that enabled my conception to begin with. And I looked at it, Eve, from early biblical references right through to today. And that was 22 years of research, basically, on and off, to find the industry that created me and find the source of my seed. Now, it was with 21st century technology in 2 different waves that I was able to find the source of my seed, but that took a while.
I think so many people would have thought, well, not everybody would have just been so dedicated to researching. And I appreciate that you said it was sort of comforting or therapeutic to do the research. I'm very interested in that concept. It's that we are often calmed by data, information that is not emotional. Facts can be very soothing in a way. So I think that's really interesting. And you help confirm my theory about that. In your research, learning about this history, do you feel like there's something that was the most surprising?
Well, when I learned, actually, I had a friend that used to breed Rottweilers. And when I exposed him to some of my findings, he said to me, there's more regulation around breeding puppies than there is around the conception of a human being. And when I discovered we have an industry, and it is an industry, it's a multi-billion dollar industry that is unregulated and free to conceive dozens, if not 100 or more siblings from the same donor without their knowledge, that I thought, gosh, this could be a thought-provoking book if I really wrote this down. And when I finally, in 2017, learned the source of my seed, I found my story completed. And with that, I just had to write it down and share it.
Another thing that's really interesting, or I found interesting or different about your book, is that you have this extensive knowledge and experience in the business world. And so I just can't imagine that it didn't really affect your perspective of reading all about this industry and this business and the money. And for someone like me, I basically don't understand anything about business and money and, economy. But you have a great way of exploring it and bringing that up. It's very accessible, and also just very interesting. I think a lot of people would have just skipped that. So I just want to, emphasize to listeners or anybody interested in the book that it's like historical. And then it's also explores economically what this means, and then it's also personal.
Yeah, well, when you have a business, it's a multi-billion-dollar business growing by double-digit percent proportions, protected from international competition by federal regulation. I mean, this would attract the likes of Goldman Sachs or J.P. Morgan, for crying out loud.
Right.
And that's how I viewed it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really smart to look at it that way. To understand also sort of there's a clinical coldness to the decisions being made because they're business decisions about how this whole thing works.
Yeah, and God we trust and the rest pay cash.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
Says it on my dollar bill too.
I have wait a minute. I have another quote that I had a bookmark in. This is from chapter 17. My knowledge of my donor conception magnified my loneliness immensely, as did the never-ending nature of my search, the breakthroughs of discovery, and the subsequent impasses. I had no donor-conceived camaraderie to lean on. I felt stranded on a remote island, alone, longing for a colleague to share the experience with. Can you talk about that and then how that's changed?
Well, it was very lonely. I really felt like I was the only person in the whole universe that had this experience. And what I learned in my research is a word called misattributed. I never heard that word before. Your DNA and your birth certificate just don't jive. There's something that's askew there with one or both parents. And I learned that there were several reasons that one could be misattributed. Late discovery adoption certainly is a large one. An extramarital affair, switched at birth, could be the product of a sexual assault or a one-night stand, or somebody like me who was semi-adopted in the old days, that was the term, secretively conceived through an anonymous donor, in my case, an anonymous sperm donor. And I learned that there were about 1 million adults that were donor conceived. I had never really thought anything about those numbers. And then in 2016, I believe, a support group was founded on Facebook. We Are Donor Conceived, that began to get some of these people that were learning they were donor conceived together to share experiences and share feelings. And that was when I discovered that was 20 plus years after my first inkling that I had this donor conception background and experience. But it was a wonderfully fulfilling experience to talk to other people that have walked in those shoes. People can be empathetic, but they don't know the no because they have never walked that walk. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I have mixed and mostly negative feelings about Facebook, speaking of industries, and a lot of what the internet has done. However, the ability to bring us all together and help connect people with similar experiences and create these groups, just awesome. I'm so glad that platform exists so that that group could exist, so that you could find one another. Another thing I wanted to talk about was that your dad, you mentioned a little bit. I think it's important in case anybody's listening who doesn't understand why it might be important to know about your conception. Your dad was sick.
My dad suffered from unipolar depression. And as a younger man, if he got depressed, he could always shake it off. And as he got older, he just couldn't shake it off anymore. So from the time I was 11 until he took his own life when I was 16, he was periodically hospitalized back and forth and just couldn't work. So old school Italian family on top of that, the protective of that information. It was perhaps reflective upon them. They were fearful that they would be conceived as flawed. So I grew up feeling maybe I'm flawed too, and I should keep this quiet.
Right. So that's what I wanted to talk about was the concern. And what is especially unique is just how extreme your father's depression was. That's really hard. That's a hard life. And he did end up taking his own life.
And we're talking in the early 60s, and lithium as a medication really hadn't been discovered until 1968. So his only recourse was a periodic electric shock, which was no picnic back then. You're strapped to a table and biting a stick.
Right. So for you to carry that your whole life, not only just the experience of growing up with your father, but the grief of losing your father, and then the knowledge that this heavy sickness could be inside you, is genetically a part of who you are. That's got to have been haunting for 50 years.
I always felt a little different in my childhood growing up too. I had my dad's Northern Italian blue eyes, but the only one in the family with a fair complexion and blondish hair. Today I'll take any color I can get, but blondish hair. And I was academic, and I had a high achieving academic, and then I went on with some life achievements as well. And some of the members of my family were rather intimidated by that. And I didn't understand that either, but I knew something was just a little askew.
You did. That's interesting. Almost everybody says that. So in a sense, when you found out that your father was not your biological father, did you feel a sense of relief about the depression?
Well, it was really confusing and conflicting emotions, Eve. How can you feel happy and sad and shame and pride all at the same time? I was angry. I was deceived. My birth certificate was a hoax, a willful lie. But at the same time, I was relieved as well. So angry and joyous, empty and fulfilled, every emotion you could possibly experience in waves almost simultaneously. It was confusing.
Yeah, I think confusing is a great word for it. I think we don't have a word for this experience quite yet. It can be really overwhelming to carry all those feelings at the same time, to have anger, relief, sadness, all of those things.
Yeah, grief and exhilaration.
Right.
And I really hadn't grieved properly from my dad to begin with. I was camouflaging that too, and developing a crusty veneer to protect myself. And at my wife's suggestion, and actually the suggestion of a few friends as well, I went and I sought some therapy to help me with this confusing range of emotions. And that was something too, in both the boardroom as well as in the war room. I had seen that if you were weak or needy, perhaps you were unfit for command. Well, I was a CEO, and I kept this thing quiet, not wanting to be perceived as being unfit for command, if you will. And my therapist, I cycled through a couple of therapists before I found the right one that had more of a practice in trauma. And his comment to me right at the get-go is I had hit a trifecta, because new trauma often is a catalyst for old trauma. So between the trauma of my childhood and the sickness of my dad, and PTSD from a wartime experience that I had never really fully dealt with, and this identity trauma all at the same time. There goes the trifecta. And I couldn't just deal with one. I had to deal with all three in order to effectively deal with it.
Yeah. Wow. That's a tall order. I'm glad you found that therapist. I'm curious about, you said that you were feeling anxiety before the book came out, about its reception. Did you, were you worried? What were you worried about? I guess is what I won't make assumptions. I'll just ask.
Well, I really fully exposed myself in this book, more so than I've ever done outside of my immediate family. So I'm sharing this with the universe, if you will. That by itself was the product of some anxiety. And of course, I'm a high achieving person and I want a high achieving book. So
Yeah.
I think every author will feel some element of anxiety about rejection.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I wondered if there was anxiety about the artificial insemination world, there being backlash somehow, or so I'm glad that wasn't a big concern. There shouldn't be. That you're really not even exposed. I mean, you are exposing something. However, this information has been around. It's just that it feels like no one has thought to look at it. Sort of hiding in plain sight. And you have, it's really brave of you to use your own story. It's very vulnerable and brave of you to use your own story to, as a catalyst for all this information.
Well, I really felt that the story might have a dry history element to it unless I could put some personalization to it. So I was looking at it from the lens of somebody that was donor conceived. It was a very unique lens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I still remember when I was reading it, and I wish I had marked the spot, but at some point, because by description, you're right. It sounds dry a little bit, like, oh, it's the history of IVF or something like that. Doesn't sound incredibly thrilling. But there was a point in the book where I gasped. And I think I sent you an email that said, you've really done something, because you've managed to make this book exciting emotionally, and informative historically. And that is something that is very, very hard to do, I think. Yeah, I gasped. I was very excited and I couldn't sleep about something the next, like if you were going to make some discovery about a family member, and I just couldn't. I was just on the edge of my seat.
Yeah, well, that was the unveiling of my source of my seed through Ancestry.com, perhaps.
Yeah,
but
could have been.
In this book, I really go over the history of assisted reproductive technology from biblical references right through to today, and I can give you the 10 top secrets of assisted reproductive technology that I explore in that book. The first one is really artificial insemination was perfected. You remember this, by the mad Russian scientist who was nicknamed Red Frankenstein?
Yes, I did remember that. I remembered that.
And artificial insemination by husband was actually first alleged in what year do you remember?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, 1462 by a medieval king.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I was going to say, like, I was going to ask you about the biblical references, but right. Yeah, it was.
And his was all about succession to the throne.
Right. Of course.
He failed in his quest to have his alleged daughter succeeding him to the throne. And of course, Isabella of Spain, who was his half sister, became the leading monarch of Spain thereafter.
Even though that's a documented assisted reproduction, the assumption is that it was happening all over the place, though, right?
Well, the first documentation of it, that's the third secret, was actually in 1790 by a physician of the English court.
Mm-hmm.
But the first artificial insemination by donor was actually documented, if you remember what year.
Oh, I don't remember the years.
Yeah, okay. It was in 1886. That surprised me. It was actually a criminal act inside of a med school.
That I remember. That part I remember, that it was a criminal act, and then all of it happened so much longer ago than we would think.
Yeah, well, that wasn't revealed until 1909. And then church and state really drove it underground
Right.
in a shroud of secrecy for about 50 years until I think 1973 when it started to come out a little bit more. The early assisted reproductive technology through donor in the early 20th century had somewhat of a eugenics overtone to it as well, to be the selected few, the chosen people. And it was actually frozen bull semen back to the farm in the 1950s that enabled the Wild West of gamete distribution and all of the banks that we have today. And then, of course, number 8 in this top secrets, 21st century DNA technology has obsoleted all of the practices, 20th century practices in assisted reproductive technology, but they're still practiced.
Right.
Go figure that.
That was going to be my question. It was a 2-part question, Peter. One was going to be, do they still try to assure people anonymity, the donors?
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, has donation gone down? Do you know?
Yeah, well, donation has not gone down. It's gone up.
Really?
Yes, in absolute numbers. In absolute numbers, of course. Your first question, did it impact anonymity?
Yeah, I mean, I just, now that if modern day technology has made some of the gamete donation process obsolete as far as their assurance of anonymity and their record keeping and things like that, I would just imagine they couldn't even promise anybody that anymore.
Yeah, they can't do that, of course, but the dots don't connect for me. The gamete banks will talk about giving a donor a choice to be known or unknown.
Right.
And the known donor would be known to the recipient at age 18. The donor might want to keep his identity a secret, but he's willing to reveal medical health and that sort of thing. And this is all done selectively by the recipient, by the parents, and the bank. Mm-hmm. And the donor can change his mind midstream. Let's say 18 years go by. Oh, no, I changed my mind. I don't want to do that. But it doesn't matter anymore because through DNA, now there's 50 million people in the DNA database. And every Black Friday, another 2 million people get added to that database.
You're absolutely right.
So now we have February in my world, in the donor conceived world, is half jokingly referred to as new sibling season.
Yeah. Well, no, that's so great because I was going to call it something like it's just for the whole MPE community. It's like,
well, sure, you get 2 million people added to the database at the holiday season. Give it 8 weeks to process, and then absolutely. February, new sibling season.
Mm-hmm. New sibling season. Absolutely. Shock season. And are you still are siblings still popping up for you occasionally?
I had a couple of new siblings pop up actually last February, and we'll see what happens this February.
Okay.
You know, it's really amazing now. My first question, in addition to what's my genealogy, what's my medical health history, and do I have any siblings? Now, my only unanswered question is how many siblings do I have really? Now, I'm not the product of a frozen sperm generation. Everything was a live fire exercise when I was conceived.
Right.
And my parents had an ethical doctor who was not using his own sperm on countless hundreds of patients. So I'm not likely to have 100 siblings, but I don't know how many I have really. The 6 of us at last count, 2 have met. The other 4 don't seem to want to know.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Are they all around your age?
Within 10 years. I'm the oldest.
Oh, okay.
And, I have found a sibling that is 5 months younger than I.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We effectively term each other the Irish twins.
Yeah. 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 It gives a whole new idea of Irish twins. Absolutely.
We used to think she was Irish. She's not Irish anymore.
No.
I used to think I was Italian. I'm not Italian.
Welcome to the club. Right.
I have a cousin that terms me now the logical Italian.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question just about if you read the book, you know that your daughter, Tracy, helped you immensely with the research process. Is she still involved in looking into history with you? Is that something you guys still do together?
Yes, periodically we will look at varying things together, more along the lines now of DNA and what we find regarding DNA. My son was actually active with me as well, but when I was on the East Coast, he was living here in California. So my daughter was in New York and I was in Boston. So we were, from a time zone standpoint and a distance standpoint, she was better able to give me the assistance that I needed.
Right. Yep. That absolutely makes sense.
She actually is a terrific forensic researcher as well. I told her she has another career if she ever wants to move into it.
That is an impressive skill set
Mm-hmm.
for sure. My next question is about a question. Is there anything you wish I had asked you, or that you think is a good question that someone has offered?
Fertility rates in the Western world are down. How much do you think in the last 4 decades?
A lot, because my dad
Yeah.
just talked to me about this.
Mm-hmm.
He brought in the newspaper article.
50%.
Wow.
2 primary reasons. One is environmental, and another one is people are just waiting longer to raise a family, and the biological clock is not cooperating. So that 50% drop in fertility rate, if you put a trajectory on that, could actually threaten the longevity of the human race by the 2045, and that's not that far out.
No.
But the ranks of the donor conceived as a population has increased by 50%, 50%, just in the last decade.
Oh, wow. So that rate is increasing much faster than the fertility rate is decreasing.
Right. Well, the sociology has changed a great deal. It's not just heterosexual couples, it's same-sex couples and single people, mostly women that are conceiving children with the benefit of a gamete distribution. And that brings together the comment about the gamete distribution system, the sperm and the egg banks and so forth, that are in need of a fix, in my estimation. And they help the conception of dozens, if not 100 or more siblings from the same donor with nobody's knowledge and no registry of being able to track them. How you like the date sibling. The no genetic testing of a donor that's required. They can answer a questionnaire, but it's not checked. It's just all self-answering. So there's many of some sins in that practice that need to be fixed. There is under no regulation on this as well. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine, ASRM, is the only trade association that's got any authority, and it's only a recommendation. They don't really have authority. They provide education and some networking for their practitioners, and they are a lobbying organization. They're providing public policy activity on behalf of their membership. The membership is in 100 different countries, although their name is American. They're represented in 100 different countries. And their recommendation is that the population of gamete distribution be restricted so that there's 25 conceptions from one donor per 800,000 population. Now let's just talk about that. That's a recommendation.
Right.
And many of the sperm and egg banks claim that they will honor that recommendation. Well, that means if I lived in Sacramento, as an example, I'd have 25 siblings.
Right.
Now, in metropolitan Boston, using that recommendation, I'd have 125 siblings.
Right. I was just doing that math. I was like, wait a minute, if it's by population.
But if I were down where you are in LA or in New York City, where my daughter is, I'd have 250 siblings. So I'm thinking, is that is that recommendation valid? Does that have any kind of orientation towards the donor or the donor conceived? That is if one person went to one sperm bank, as a for instance. What if he went to four?
Right. There's no,
They don't cross-check them.
there's not a database.
So instead of 250 times four, I could have 1,000. There's something seriously askew in an unregulated industry that enables the conception of dozens, if not 100 or more siblings from the same donor with nobody's knowledge, no way of registering it, no requirement to genetically test, no requirement to give the genetic health history to the donor conceived. And there's no laws preventing fertility fraud or penalizing fertility fraud. It might be unethical, but it's not unlawful. So there's no recourse. There's no recourse. Who do you go to see if you are the victim of fertility fraud?
Mm-hmm.
So what I hope that I can get from this book, what I aspire to get is, well, several-fold. To be a representative of many of the feelings of the misattributed, to impact the practice of assisted reproductive technology positively, and to shine some sort of a legislative light on this thing and impact the legislative agenda to gain a donor-conceived Bill of Rights. And the donors all have rights, and the recipients all have rights, and sure they do. But can you point at anyone? Can you point to one right that somebody like me might have?
Right. No.
That's a void.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm somewhat of a Don Quixote here to right the wrongs.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. That's great. That was going to be my next question was what are your hopes for this book? And are there people out there working legislative on the legislative side of things?
There's a patchwork quilt, my words, Eve, of activity that is state by state for one particular area, genetic testing as an example. And it is state by state, but there's no real federal activity on this thing. So I'm hopeful that the state by state activity will gain a momentum, and my book can help shine a light on this, and we can gain some sort of a federal activity on this and package it all up as a donor conceived Bill of Rights, as opposed to we pick one thing here and one thing there and a third thing here in one state over there and one state over there and one state over there.
Mm-hmm. A donor conceived Bill of Rights. I love that. Was there anything else I was supposed to ask you? Do you think?
You tell me.
Did we do all 10 of the secrets?
Well, the last one we didn't do.
Okay. What's that one?
We talked about Red Frankenstein,
Mm-hmm.
and the 10th secret is one that hasn't been unveiled just yet. What will be the nickname of the next Red Frankenstein? Now, we have science moving so rapidly, and it's back from the farm. You have the cloning of sheep and Cocker Spaniels. Just last year, at a research university in Australia, Monash University. They're very strong in the area of reproductive science. They were able to create a model embryo from skin. No egg, no sperm. So without some sort of an ethics mandate, what is the nickname of the next Red Frankenstein? We'll see.
Have they published a paper about it yet?
Yes.
They have. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
February of last year, actually.
Okay. Wow. I don't know, but that would be a whole new.
Yeah. Already we can manipulate genes to the traits to enable a conception. And there was one Chinese doctor who in 2019 got sentenced to 3 years for doing just that.
Because that starts to feel like eugenics pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah, pretty quickly, doesn't it? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty scary. Well, I just loved your book. I thought it was great. It was wonderful to get to spend some time with you today.
Thank you, Eve. Same here.
It really is a good book. I really did gasp. I really did feel informed and continuously inspired to work towards change and information and education about all of this world, that conception world, not only donor conception, but all the misattributed conception world. needs to change?
Well, I've combined a very intimate memoir, if you will, along with a tell-all expose about an industry that is out of control and needs a fix.
Yeah, awesome. That sounds like something I would want to read.
Well, thanks for the visibility, Eve. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. You're doing a good thing by telling your story, and it is brave. It is brave to use your own story to make it an accessible medium. That's really important. So so thank you for contributing to the library of misattributed parentage information, knowledge, education, movement, change. Thank you again to Mr. Boni for giving me his morning. Thank you to his son for hosting him in the East Bay so that he and I could be in the same time zone. Thank you to his daughter for helping him with all that research. I have gratitudes for all the parts that made our time together possible. Run, don't walk to your bookstore. Get a copy of this book, Uprooted, Family Trauma, Unknown Origins, and the Secretive History of Artificial Insemination. I also have a link on my website if you're looking for a way to find Peter's book and or all the books that I have featured here on the podcast. Just go to my website, everythingsrelativepodcast.com. Speaking of books, I am thrilled to know that by the time this episode airs, it is definitely official that the process journal that I worked on all winter is available for you. If you are hearing this podcast, then the journal is available. I can't explain how nervous I was, everyone. It felt really touch and go there for a while. It is called Who Even Am I Anymore? I created it for you and me and everyone like us who might appreciate a little guidance in processing their DNA discovery. It really was a labor of love, and I'm really proud of it. But more than that, I am eager for our community to have more resources. So head to my website or Amazon and get yourself a copy of Who Even Am I Anymore? No matter where you are in your journey. And I'll be here again next week with a new way to explore all the ways that DNA testing is changing our world. If you have a story that you want to share, email me, eve@everythingsrelativepodcast.com. Find me on the socials at Everything's Relative Podcast. If you like anything you've heard today, throw me a star rating. Write me a review. And whether you do that or not, thanks so much for being here. Even if you hate listening, I'm grateful for it. Bye-bye, everybody. Take your shoes off before you go inside.
Everything's Relative with Eve Sturgis is produced by Eve Sturgis and Kaylin Egan and edited by Joy Rumel. Logo designed by Ivy McNally, and music is used with permission from Goodbye the Band. Eve is a licensed psychotherapist, but her podcast episodes are not therapy sessions.